We're going to finish up our cell transport unit by talking about a couple more ways that things can get in and out of cells. And again, why is this important? Because cells are living, and living things have demands. Oxygen, water, sugar, amino acids. We've been going through this, right? Living things need to get rid of waste. Think about everything that goes in and out of your body, right? That is exactly what's happening on a cellular level as well. The reason why you eat food is because your cells are hungry. The reason why you drink water is because your cells need water. You know, these are all things that we're doing to get to our cells. So there's a couple more ways, and the next one is going to be called active transport. So the last thing we talked about was called passive transport. What's the difference between passive and active? Pretty simple, energy, okay? So think about the term passive. If you're a passive person, you're just going to sit back. You're not going to do anything. If you're an active person, you're going to get up and move. And that's really the big difference. So let's talk about it a little bit. So basically, I said that there's something called the concentration gradient, where things go from high concentration to low concentration. That is 100% true. But there are times when things go the opposite direction. They go from low to high concentration. It happens, right? What if I need to get something past the cell membrane because my cell needs it and there's more on the inside than on the outside? Well, sometimes there's situations that occur where they can go against the concentration gradient, but you need two things for that to happen. So let's talk about that. So basically, the first thing you need to have is something called energy. And we all know that energy exists, right? You can feel energy. When you light a fire, you're feeling the energy of the heat, right? If you rub your hands together like this really fast, you feel warmth, right? That is energy. Energy exists in all different forms, but it's all essentially the same thing. It's the ability to do work. That's what energy is, right? So the more energy you have, the more work you can do. So in order to get things to go against the concentration gradient, that requires energy. And we're going to talk more about that. So an example would be swimming against the current of a river. And I talked about this a little bit in class, but let's just, reiterate this, right? So let's say I have a river here, and the river is going this direction, right? Where does a river come from? It comes from on top of a mountain. Let's say we have some water going all the way up here to the top of a mountain. Let's draw a little mountain, right? And that water is going from where there's more water, so there's a higher concentration up here. That's where it's coming from, to a lower concentration down here. And there's a flow. It's going this direction. So let's say you want to take advantage of that, and you get a little inner tube, and you're cruising around, you're laying in your inner tube, right? And you're going this direction. This does not require any energy. The reason why is because there's a gradient that exists. The high concentration is going to low concentration, there's a current, you're sitting back and you're moving. But let's say you want to go the opposite direction. You want to go against the concentration gradient, from low to high concentration. What you have to do now is you have to start kicking those little feet of yours, right? You got to kick those feet and you can move that direction. But that takes energy, right? You have to swim against the current. That is essentially what is happening when we talk about active transport. These particles are going against the current. Another good way to think of it is think of the end of the day. During a normal school year, at 2:20, everybody gets let out, right? Those front doors of the school have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students pouring out to go to the buses. Now imagine you forgot something and you have to go back in. Imagine trying to get through all those people that are coming out to the bus so you can go back in. That takes a lot of energy, right? If you're coming out with everybody else, you could probably pick your feet up and they'll carry you, right? There's enough people moving that you're going to kind of just keep going with the flow. But if you want to go against it, that takes energy. So that's the first thing that you need when you're talking about active transport. The second thing you need is you need a protein to carry you across the membrane. So we talked about integral proteins. You need a protein to make that happen. Now, in facilitated diffusion, you also need a protein, but the difference is it's going the same direction, so it doesn't take any energy. If you're using active transport, it's going against. So if you look here, this is just an image. If I want these particles to go across the membrane, I need energy. And energy comes in the form of something called ATP, which we're going to talk about in the next unit. But that is what our body uses for energy. That is what allows things to pass through the membrane. So if you don't have any energy, you can't use active transport, right? Because it's going against the flow. And you need a protein or a doorway to go through. It can't just go through the cell membrane. It needs to go through a protein. So there are two things that you need for active transport: protein, doorway, and energy to push it through. So That's basically what active transport is. The next topic is going to be something called endocytosis and exocytosis. And that is something that our cells have to do sometimes to get rid of waste and to take things in that are just too big to get through the membrane. So we're going to talk about that for a minute. Cytosis means basically cytoplasm, which means cell, cellular. Endo means into and exo means out of. So endocytosis means to bring into the cell and exocytosis means to leave the cell. So when particles are just too big to pass through the membrane, that doesn't mean they can't get in. Sometimes the cell will actually envelop that thing by going around it. By the cell membrane will actually go around and bring it in. Okay, so that's endocytosis. That's when the cell membrane folds around an object and envelops it. So let's say this is a food particle that's too big to get into the membrane. What will happen is, if you take a look here, this cell will actually go around it. It looks kind of like Pac-Man. It is exactly like Pac-Man. It will actually surround that object and it will eventually form around it, and then that object will be in a vacuole. And that vacuole will be in the cell until it's needed. So it's stored in there. There's two types of endocytosis. I'm sorry, there's two different types. The first one is called phagocytosis. And phagocytosis is what you use to take in large particles, like other cell parts, or food, essentially. And there's penocytosis, which is used for taking in liquids. I have a kind of gross way to remember it. P, urine, is liquid, right? Penocytosis is for liquids. Phagocytosis is for solids or larger objects. So those are the two types of endocytosis. Most cells use phagocytosis, and a lot of our cells do that, including our immune system. So this is a cool video that I want to show you. So this is an image of a white blood cell. So these are the white blood cells. This is our immune system. And our white blood cells actually attack bacteria that don't belong. So what you're going to see in this little clip here is you're going to see this big blobby guy here. That is a white blood cell. These little circles, those are red blood cells. So those are all the red blood cells that carry oxygen. And this little black dot here is a little bacteria. So let's just watch this real quick. So this is a white blood cell chasing down a bacteria. So that little bacteria is moving around, and the white blood cell is trying to get it. Now, the only way the white blood cell can get it is to phagocytize it. So, look at it, trying to get away. Isn't this crazy? This is so crazy to me. This is happening in your blood right now. But this bacteria cell, there it goes. And the cell actually wraps around it and envelops it. And it will eventually digest it and get rid of it. That is how your immune system works. I bet you thought it was a little more complex than that. It's as simple as that in some respects. The white blood cells just go and envelop anything that doesn't belong. It could be old cell parts. It could be things that don't belong. It could be particles of pollen. Let's say you're allergic. That's how our body gets rid of things. Cells literally go and ingest them. And the second type of this process is exocytosis. That is how our cell gets rid of things that are too big to leave the cell membrane. It's the same idea. What ends up happening is the vacuole inside of the cell will fuse with the cell membrane and it will release it. That's how our cells release the proteins that we make. So let's say this is a cell that makes a hormone, like, for example, serotonin, which makes you feel happy, or something like adrenaline, which makes you angry, or not angry, I'm sorry, which makes you ready to fight, if you need to fight or run. Those are made by the cells, and how they get released by the cell is the vacuole that they're inside will fuse with the cell membrane, the Golgi body will package it, and then it will fuse with the cell membrane. It will get released out into the body or out of the organism altogether. So endocytosis is how the cell brings things in, and exocytosis is how the cell gets rid of things. But they work in the same general idea. The cell membrane will either envelop an object if it's endocytosis, or it will excrete an object if it's exocytosis. And that is the end of this section. Thank you very much.